Today on Sekulow, major concern ahead of Trump rally.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, folks, 11 days out from the election. Early voting numbers are big. We want to see those numbers continue to grow in states across the country that do allow early voting. It's important, I think, that for those of you who can take advantage of that opportunity, you've still got time likely wherever you are. If you do have early voting in your state, make sure you know where to go. Make sure you know what you need to have. And give yourself time because the numbers are getting bigger. It usually is, I can almost certainly say, unless you go maybe right before, people head to work or at lunch hour or maybe right after people are heading home from work, it's definitely going to take less time than on election day. So if you could, take some time in between those hours, people, we are hearing about sometimes it taking up to an hour. So you have to imagine on election day, that similar place could take up to 3. So think about if you can't commit that kind of time, and honestly, none of us can predict if we can commit that kind of time on election day. We don't know what will happen to us, our family member, health-wise, school concerns, kid concerns, grandparent concerns, all of those issues, weather issues. So take advantage. It's the same voting system. This is not like absentee. I only say you only use absentee if you have to. That's something you do if you know you're not going to be able to be in your home state, and you have to plan that out. And I will tell you, that is a little bit more of, it's got to get through the mail. There's a lot of ways to mess that up where the vote's not counted, or you have to call back and see if you have time to correct it sometimes. So I'm not pushing absentee as the best way to go. By the way, I think most places were already past that window. But if you can early vote, I just want to encourage you to do it. And again, it is if you've already done it, encourage your friends and family to do it that way. And it doesn't have to be this moment, it doesn't have to be today, but know it when you can, know when it's over, and try to plan it. So if something happens that day, make sure you plan it where you can go the next day. Or, try to give yourself a couple different times. Because we all know with elections this close, that those kind of voters who, again, because something happened and they absolutely can't get to the vote, they can't wait in line for 3 hours. Doesn't mean you're a bad person if something happened to you and that happened. But we now have an opportunity to at least try and get ahead of that and make sure those votes are going to be in. They don't start being actually counted by actually who you voted for until polls close. So they get treated the exact same way. It's no different system. I always want to say as we get out before we get into the issue. Now, the issue of today is what Democrats have decided to at least double down on 11 days out from the election. I don't know if they're going to keep it up till next week because, they've thrown out another random accuser, former Sports Illustrated person. I think those stories aren't really working with Americans anymore and with Donald Trump. So that kind of doesn't work. I think they can throw all that kind of trash out. But this idea that he's Hitler is now coming from we've heard fascist directly from people like Harris, but now you're getting other people to back up that he's actually trying to emulate Hitler because he has a rally this weekend at Madison Square Garden, and that in 1939, before the U.S. had entered the war, so we were not at that point. There was no Pearl Harbor. The U.S. did not have troops overseas yet, and had not yet taken a position on whether we would, at least publicly. And there was a pro-Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. Not good. But guess who else has been at Madison Square Garden? Hillary Clinton herself, during her campaign, her losing campaign. Her husband accepted the nomination there. The DNC was there in 92. George W. Bush accepted the renomination there in his reelection. I worked on it in 2004 at Madison Square Garden. It's an iconic place in America. In my mind, a lot more iconic than Houston, Texas for Beyonce, since Texas is not a battleground state at all for Harris. But yet, she's willing to go there for a concert. So who's using their time better? And if this is what they're going to, folks, this is grasping at straws now. When you have to call your opponent Hitler, and Hillary Clinton has to come out and say he's Hitler because he had a rally there, but she's not, even though she had a rally there in her election. We'll take your calls, 1-800-684-3110. This is the kind of garbage we're going to have to be ready for. We'll be right back.
Former President Trump will be at a rally in Vegas tonight as Republicans are beating Democrats in early voting turnout there for the first time since '08.
The former president now holds at least a slight lead in all 7 of the toss-up states that we follow so closely when you look at the average of the polls.
It seems to be very close. At the national level, Harris is leading in our average, but by 0.3 of 1 percentage point. So Trump's in a way stronger position now than he was 4 years ago and 8 years ago.
But in fact, will the winner get at least 300 electoral votes? The answer is majority yes. There's a majority yes chance, 60% chance that the winner of this election gets at least 300 electoral votes.
That you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939. I write about this in my book. President Franklin Roosevelt was appalled that neo-Nazis, fascists in America were lining up to essentially pledge their support for the kind of government that they were seeing in Germany.
She was talking about linking him to this rally. He's going to have a rally at MSG. A lot of people sing, a lot of people perform at MSG. Do you link everyone who's ever performed at MSG to this neo-Nazi rally back in 1939? She's saying that's what this is, that Donald Trump is going to MSG. And she says to Caitlin, she says, and I write about it in my book. Yeah. She's trying to sell her book. So there are 2 messages that she's giving. Buy my book, and he's a fascist.
Sources close to the former president say this moment's all about making sure the base doesn't become complacent. That's why he's rallying evangelicals. He's reaching out to young conservatives, going on Joe Rogan's podcast later this week. And on Sunday, he'll be at Madison Square Garden in New York. It's all about casting his campaign as a movement of change, an echo of 2016.
Back to Sekulow. So Hillary Clinton, she didn't just write this, by the way. She said it. So I want to play the clip for you so you can exactly see how Hillary Clinton is trying to mimic what is the new talking point from the Harris campaign and the Democrat Party about Donald Trump. The one word, fascist, and then we'll have other people start saying Nazi. We'll have some others say Hitler, and we'll see if that sticks for these next few days. If not, I'm sure it'll be something else next week. But take a listen and watch.
And, one other thing that you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939. I write about this in my book. President Franklin Roosevelt was appalled that neo-Nazis, fascists in America were lining up to essentially pledge their support for the kind of government that they were seeing in Germany. So I don't think we can ignore it. Now,
okay, then we can't ignore it. Now, in her book, she writes about Franklin Roosevelt. I'm not calling Franklin Roosevelt obviously a fascist, but it was interesting because he was died in his 4th term in office, and we had to put forward a constitutional amendment so that the precedent set by George Washington was actually set in stone, because we saw that there were some leaders who would not just kind of go by tradition and history, and after 2 terms, realize that the United States of America, after 8 years, we're going to move on with leadership, and even if you could get reelected again. And so we put forward a constitutional amendment. So you could say all these things about people in the past and differently. Everybody goes to Madison Square Garden. I've been there for concerts. I've been there for the RNC. The DNC has been there. Jimmy Carter accepted the nomination there for Democrats. Bill Clinton did it for Democrats. Hillary Clinton had a rally there. So the idea that it's because it's in Madison Square Garden is ridiculous. It's an iconic place in America. It's almost a venue everyone knows about.
Yeah, it's the most famous arena in the world, I'd say.
It's not
definitely
like the
in
greatest
the country.
Arena.
No, it's been there for decades now.
I remember doing it for the RNC, and it was actually tough because usually you go to the most modern place you can find for production value. Yeah. We were dealing with 500,000 anti-war protesters.
Madison Square Garden.
Bush was being called Hitler then too, by the way. Now, they weren't saying it was Hitler because of where we decided to have the Republican convention. The location stuff to me, remember, it was Joe Biden who came out with the black background, the red and black background, and the 2 Marines during a political speech. So he used the U.S. military and their imagery for a political speech to attack Donald Trump. It looked a lot more like you were emulating the backgrounds of fascists and Nazis. And what he said was kind of emulating, and they actually realized that was a very bad look, and they moved on. Again, bad look, and they moved on. Like I said,
Madison Square Garden, you said, is probably the most famous. It's definitely the most famous arena in our country. I don't think there's most arenas that people can just name that aren't in your local market.
It's called the Garden.
Yeah, the Garden or MSG. People know these things. It's been around. It's hosted some of the biggest events ever. Billy Joel just wrapped up his 100th and whatever show. It is one of those places that is iconic. It's easy to get to also if you're in New York City. So it's convenient in that way. But like you said, it's an old dated venue, but with so much history and Americana associated with it, it's also one of the most restricted arenas in the country. I know from people that have deal with them, they have a lot of restrictions on what you can and cannot do at Madison Square Garden and who can be there when you and can't be there within certain amounts of time. So there's a lot of things like that in terms of security and all of that that gets taken care of when you work the Garden.
I will say this too, just to kind of double down on this. Again, you go to Madison Square Garden, you go to New York City, not only because it's tri-state, you're also Pennsylvania, which is a swing state, is not far away. But there are a lot of people who vote at their home states who are temporarily in New York for periods of time because of work. So you're getting basically a snapshot of all 50 states when you're in New York City, not just the tri-states, but definitely add to that a major swing state, which is Pennsylvania. I mean, it's sometimes only 40 minutes away from parts here. So you're getting this iconic imagery that Hillary Clinton thought was cool to use because she was there in 2016. And just because Donald Trump wants to, again, not start wars, make America great again by having a strong military so you don't have to go to war. This is the guy who recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is the president who said the Golan Heights were going to be recognized by the U.S., and he handed it over to Netanyahu as part of Israel. Okay? He went as president, not just because when he was running for president, to the Western Wall in East Jerusalem, which most supporters of Palestinians think should be going back to the Palestinians, even though the Israelis keep it open for all major religious faiths to be able to utilize, whether it's Muslims at the Dome of the Rock, Jews at the Western Wall, Christians at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They make sure to protect all of those sites so that people have the freedom to worship and visit them for their historical purposes. But even the Abraham Accords that followed those two moves, and there was no, by the way, people thought you could never do that without a two-state solution. Part of that move was because those countries, people wanted to be able to visit Jerusalem, and it wasn't Israel that barred them from visiting Israel and Jerusalem. It was their own countries who their passports were no good. It would say that. You cannot travel to Israel on this passport, and you'd be in serious trouble, too. So that was part of it, was just tourism, religious tourism. And so I think, Will, this idea, again, they don't talk about any of his policies. But to me, I mean, maybe they're at a point now where they would call Netanyahu this. It's like, is the term now not, it's like he's anti, is it really about Jews? Is it, I don't even know. Or is it because I guess they don't care about what he did for Israel. But the idea is, if this is what you're throwing out a week before, not good.
Well, and we even talked about that this playbook for the Democrats goes back to even President Truman calling Thomas Dewey Hitler and likening him to Hitler as a fascist tool back in October 26th of 1948. So the history of Democrats using Hitler as a label for a Republican challenger is a long one. The problem here is that it seems like they've exhausted all of their other plans to go after President Trump, and they're reverting back to what the entire country was up in arms about and warned about after the Butler, Pennsylvania failed assassination attempt when President Trump was shot. Everyone came out and said, hey, can we maybe not call him Hitler anymore? And when you're putting him on the cover of magazines with a Hitler mustache and swastikas and trying to call him literally Hitler, maybe people then that aren't right in the head and can't decipher political speech that you may try to couch it as saying this is political rhetoric and do dangerous things. If you ramp those attacks up, they're doing it much more now than they ever did. They kind of let the surrogates and they let the media run with that and didn't do it themselves. But then you had Kamala Harris in front of the vice president's residence just this week talking about General Kelly's alleged statements and bringing up all of these things. Now it is the principal and the other high-level surrogates that are doing this again. They have not just doubled down, but they have added gasoline to that fire. They are ramping up these attacks at a very dangerous time. And as you have referenced, Jordan, that your concern is about the country in the time after the election to Inauguration Day if President Trump wins, because of how bad this rhetoric has been. They have put, and Joe Biden even said, we need to put a target on him. He later apologized and said wrong timing because of the assassination attempts. But that is effectively what the Democrats have done. And they have made running for the president of the United States, if you're a conservative, much more dangerous than it ever has been.
Donald Trump's risking his life every time he goes out in public. Now, and you could say he was a big enough person, obviously celebrity-wise, that he already took that into consideration. But until he had run for president this time, no one had actually fired a shot at him. I'm sure there were people that have been stopped before and that we don't know about, but they've now, and then not only that, then someone else tried to do it a few weeks later. I mean, the idea is, again, you demonize your opponent to a point of calling them basically Satan. I mean, the only person that kind of embodied that kind of evil on a grand scale, maybe you could say the Ayatollah in Iran. I don't even know if they actually at that level, even you would say, because it wasn't as, maybe we don't feel as directly here. But the idea again, and Logan, the second part of this is the running away from media, which is always interesting too. Like she's got her supporters now going after Anderson Cooper, including Charlamagne the God went on and was like cursing at him on CNN. And she's now walked away from being on Joe Rogan, even though they made a big deal that she was going to do Joe Rogan, because Donald Trump is going to go on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, so he goes on today, reaching millions and millions, the biggest audience probably in the country.
And you don't know that Joe Rogan is going to tell all his people, I think Donald Trump's the... He doesn't
say that the way. And the fact that you're attacking Anderson Cooper says a lot. The fact that you can't get through an Anderson Cooper. And
if you're a Democrat who can't do a town hall with Anderson Cooper,
yeah,
Joe Rogan is going to be really tough, because she doesn't even want to talk about the border wall. What if you get some of those goofy things he's into? Like, things that are more like a little bit more on the conspiracy side. Yeah. You at least have to know how to handle, right?
Yeah. And clearly, she can't handle that. She can't answer any of the questions. I was watching it with my son, the Anderson Cooper segment yesterday, and he even was, at 12 years old, was yelling, like, answer the question. Why is there not an answer? He goes, why do they always do this? And I'm like, well, now I got to explain a lot more. But we got a lot coming up, and we got a lot of great guests coming up. You can call in 1-800-684-3110, 1-800-684-3110. Mike Pompeo, Rick Grenell join us in just a moment.
With just 12 days to go until Election Day, former President Trump in Georgia for the 10th time this campaign.
In Georgia, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala Harris that, Kamala, you've done a horrible job.
Vice President Harris in Pennsylvania at a CNN town hall, her second time taking questions directly from voters in the state this week.
Here she goes trying to address flip-flops on the border wall. Watch.
Let's just fix the problem.
To fix the problem, you're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I'm not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
So you don't think it's stupid anymore?
I think what he did and how he did it did not make much sense, because he actually didn't do much of anything.
But you do want to build some wall.
I want to strengthen our border.
Kamala Harris has lost the plot. She came into this race after the Democrat Party staged a coup against Joe Biden as the candidate of joy, the candidate of change. All of that was a bunch of baloney, and now she has resorted to the Democrat Party's instinct of being the party against President Trump rather than the party for the American people.
An establishment which has been weakening this country, selling out our interests, betraying the middle class, and crushing working Americans. Now, that's what this is all about. And Kamala Harris is the last desperate, incompetent, and inarticulate gasp of a system which is collapsing.
She has fallen behind because the American people, or at least a critical portion of them, are very uncertain about her. And they want to be reassured. They want to know that she's not a chowderhead. They want to know that she has the right stuff. They want to know that if they gave her a penny for her thoughts, they wouldn't get back change.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined by a senior counsel with ACLJ, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And Secretary Pompeo, I want to jump right into this because, again, we're 11 days out. We're seeing, I think, good numbers on early voting because the bigger they are, you can start seeing that there's more Republicans taking advantage of this. And we've done a lot more the last 4 years in educating people about early voting versus absentee voting. So we're starting to see some kind of, I think, dangerous move by Democrats, and not just the Harris campaign, but even Hillary Clinton kind of echoing this. And now it's, we're seeing directly that Donald Trump is either a fascist, they'll either just use that term, or he's trying to emulate Nazis, and then others will say Hitler. So they've kind of got three stages of it. Harris will use the fascist line, the next stage down will say Nazi, and the next stage down of activists will go directly to Hitler. We walked through, Secretary Pompeo, just a few things that Donald Trump and you did for Israel, recognizing the capital as Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and the Abraham Accords. I can't think of anyone who actually, in one term as president, who's done more for the Jewish people.
Jordan, it is pretty remarkable when you just compare facts, right? This is not about hyperbole or politics. Just in which case were the American people safer? Was the relationship between the United States and Israel deeper and more secure? And frankly, was the Middle East more stable than in those 4 years? When they throw these words around, these words like fascist, or they talk about Hitler, they're fundamentally forgetting the history. They want people to emote, not use their minds and actually look at rational policies that led to those outcomes. I'm convinced the American people aren't going to buy this. They've clearly failed to make the sale, and now they are resorting to ad hominem attacks, name calling, and talking about fascists when in fact one of the central features of fascism is that you don't value human beings. You classify people by race or by other group characteristics. That is the hallmark of these last 4 years. And you can see what that's done in the Middle East, the risk that is created and the conflagration that followed from that failure to deter our adversary in the region, the Islamic Republic of Iran.
We're starting to see on the international stage, even while the election's going on, more lawmakers in Washington, D.C., and it might be the biggest group so far. We're seeing about 100, it is bipartisan, that are threatening UN funding because of its treatment of Israel, this constant censuring of Israel, the fact that they are the most censured country by the United Nations, even though they are one of the few actual similar democracies in the world. They're not perfect, no one is, but the idea that you can choose your faith or choose to have no faith, you're again choosing who your partners are in life, and all of that, freedom of speech. The idea that Israel's the most censored we should be putting forward legislation to at least let the UN know we're paying attention, and that it might actually impact their funding. Do you think that could be effective to the UN at a point if there was enough movement behind it?
Jordan, I think it is a worthy project. I hope that legislation passes. I hope that 100 is a small number. That what shocks me isn't that there are 100 members of Congress who are thinking about trying how to leverage U.S. support for the UN into a UN that is not deeply anti-Semitic, deeply anti-Zionist, deeply anti-Israel. The fact that there's not 435 of them is appalling to me. I don't know how effective it will be. I think the United States will actually have to deliver against that. That is, we will actually have to convince the United Nations that, no, you can't do this. You can't behave in this way that is so imbalanced, that talks about Israel being an occupying force in Gaza when there hasn't been a single Israeli in Gaza since 2006, right, as a symptom of the deep anti-Semitism. Whether it changes UN behavior or not, Jordan, it would be the right thing for the United States to do, to withhold funding, to deny the UN funding, to be so anti-Israel, and in that case, anti-American as well.
Yeah, and I think again, that's something else I could add to that list. While you were Secretary of State, CIA Director, President Trump was in office, the idea that the funding to UNRWA was cut, and the UN Human Rights Council, the U.S. pulling out of the council itself. And again, by being the number one funder of the UN, when you pull out those even parts, you don't have to pull out everything. and you pull out parts, it doesn't give up your seat on the Security Council and your veto power there. You're still able to be extremely influential, but it sends that message, like you said. Even if they don't want to change, you don't have to give them more money to be able to carry out their bad policies or their bad ideas or just their PR campaign against Israel, as so many of these censures are. We also know, because this has happened right in the middle of everything, that the FBI is investigating how this U.S. intel regarding Israel's plans on attacking Iran, how that got leaked to the Iranians. I think that, again, it'll be interesting to know if we'll ever know if there's a culprit found and if anybody's held accountable. I feel like the news kind of covered it, and then it kind of moved on. I think if it wasn't right during the election, Secretary Pompeo, we'd still be talking about him almost every day.
Yeah. This is a big deal. This is not only dangerous, it's curious. But frankly, I'll be honest with you, Jordan, I'm surprising when you put people in senior positions at the Department of Defense and at the State Department and in our embassies in the Middle East, when you put people that aren't pro-Israel, who are talking about the fact that the protesters on campus have a right to do what they're doing, when that includes violence, when the senior leaders all talk about the fact that the Israelis are the problem, they need to cease fire, they need to stand down, not the fact that Hamas is still holding Americans there. When you see those things, you are greenlighting exactly that kind of behavior. These leaks of information now have clearly impacted Israeli decision-making and thinking, as best I can discern. And that creates risk not only for Israel, but for the Gulf Arab states and the United States as well. We need to get to the bottom of this. The American people need to understand this, how it happened, why it happened, and then the individuals who did this need to be held fully accountable for what they did. I haven't seen that happen in these last 3.5 years, Jordan. I'm not optimistic that will, but if there's a new administration, I hope it will get to the bottom of it, and I hope that they will hold accountable anybody who leaked classified information about an important ally's pending operation.
Secretary Pompeo, as always, we appreciate your time, especially 11 days out from an election. We know you're working hard for President Trump and candidates across the country, whether it's in media or at events across the country with people. We appreciate it. We know everybody's got pretty wild schedules these days, so to take that time. And Logan, I want to go right to this again. The idea that, we can't even, it's like even in your mind, the head of what has happened in just a week in the United States, a plan, a nuclear, how to take out the nuclear facilities in Iran. And we know the U.S. has apologized. So that kind of makes it real from the get-go. I don't even know if them making that public was a good idea, because at least you could have played down whether or not it was real or not. But this administration went right out and said, we don't know who did it, but they put the apology public to Israel. So that means you're almost telling Iran it was legitimate.
It was us, yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
just a jump. Anybody could write that.
It feels like one of those mistakes that happens in the press where they reveal something, like Geraldo, whoever with the line. I feel like those are the kind of moments where you're like, why did you do this? Why did you need to explain this? We could have at least taken care of that internally. But for some reason, it's this bowing down. It's this apologizing for anything that has to do with Israel. And that feels like that story continues on. And you're now seeing probably a good chance, maybe one of the most Republican voted from the Jewish community, maybe ever, coming this go around. So it should be pretty interesting. Give us a call at 1-800-684-3110. We got one line open right now. Again, 1-800-684-3110. If you don't get the full hour of this broadcast on your local radio station, you should join us live on ACLJ.org, on YouTube, on Rumble, and of course on X, we're there as well. Join us live each and every day, noon to 1 p.m. We're keeping you updated with all the latest news, as well as what's going on in the world of the ACLJ. And we got some great new projects that will be rolling out over the next few weeks. You're going to want to stay tuned to that. Make sure you're following, subscribing. This break is short. We'll be back in less than a minute, so stay tuned.
Some people think champions are born, that it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
There are times in our lives that we are called, every one of us, to step up and serve a cause greater than ourselves.
Even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong, that it can't be done. It can be a difficult stand, but it's one any of us can make, including you.
You can be the change. You can make that difference.
You can be a champion. We cannot do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
So the point where this rhetoric is getting so troubling, we've had a assassination attempt where the president was actually shot. We've had a former president was shot, President Trump. We've had then just, not too far after, I think weeks later, a guy in the bushes with an assault rifle who was going to try and shoot at President Trump on the next hole of a golf course. And then, after the first time, we know that President Biden called President Trump to check in, and we heard this whole move to say, the rhetoric needs to calm down. But now we're 11 days out before the election. The polls aren't looking as good for the Democrats, and the numbers aren't looking as good. And by the way, that means nothing at this point. That does not mean, the Republicans have won either. Never believe that, take it all with a grain of salt. But when you start saying, you know what, we'll just start calling him the worst names we can start. I mean, the next is Satan. I mean, directly. I think once you get to Hitler, there's the jump is not too far from Satan, and that's about it. I mean, other than just saying worst person in the world, worst thing in the world. I mean, I don't deity. I don't whatever you want to say. You can call him and say he's not human. At this point, this is someone who wanted to end wars, a tough talker, because he used words and threats and policy to get people to do. Dangerous people to do what we wanted instead of having to put actual U.S. assets and humans at risk and Americans at risk. And we look at this world now. And by the way, John Kelly and all these people, like I've said, been in meetings. And again, we worked for President Trump at the time as private legal counsel. It's not giving anything away that we shouldn't, because John Kelly wasn't in there when we were doing any of that. But he would start fights with President Trump over like TV anchors. This is while, he's running the country and dealing with all these other, issues to try and distract him from running the country. And you got a chief of staff starting fights with you in front of people, in front of your legal team. That, again, if that was a real thing, you shouldn't be doing it in front of them. So he was never treated the president, in my opinion, it was shocking disrespect. And if they had a great personal relationship and all, but we know that wasn't the case. And to me, knowing how people treated past presidents, disagree with them or not, and then to see that, it was pretty disgusting. Then to see these statements, 12, 13 days out before an election, when all of these guys, remember, make a lot more money if we're at war. And the companies that they're on the boards of make a lot more money when they've got to keep replenishing military assets. That, by the way, that includes even if you're not actually at war, but you're basically sending all of the weapons to a major war like Ukraine. And like we've all said, it's not the idea that Vladimir Putin is right by invading or that Russia is right, but that why can't we ever come up with an end game of it that we'd be comfortable with? Why can't President Trump has? He said what he wants to do, and that's somehow unacceptable to the world. So is the only acceptable outcome the overthrow of the Russian government? Because that's not just Ukraine. That's a lot of other people's decisions, including a lot of Russians. And it doesn't seem like this is a war that's going in that direction right now. So, again, when you look at all these issues, I think we just have to, as voters, keep your head down, get out the vote. Don't be too distracted, but be ready to fight back if people have questions. Certainly, listen, if new voters or people who don't pay as much attention are starting to ask you questions because they know you do, don't yell at people back. Just tell them back with the facts. Here's what President Trump did for the Jewish people. Here is the difference in what the Democrat Party right now, and including members of its party, have said about the Jewish people, or even Harris, who won't really commit on those issues and seems like to not really have a grasp really of the Middle East or of international policy, foreign policy. 1-800-684-3110 if you want to join us on the show. Rick Grenell is going to be on next live as well, giving us a report directly from the Trump campaign trail, so you don't want to miss that. If you're tuning in, share it with your friends and family. Support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. Our election integrity efforts are already moving. We're assisting people. We're going to launch more of that next week, and we'll get into more details. aclj.org. Donate today.
Former President Trump will be at a rally in Vegas tonight as Republicans are beating Democrats in early voting turnout there for the first time since 2008.
The former president now holds at least a slight lead in all 7 of the toss-up states that we follow so closely when you look at the average of the polls.
It seems to be very close. At the national level, Harris is leading in our average, but by 0.3 percentage point. So Trump's in a way stronger position now than he was 4 years ago and 8 years ago.
But in fact, will the winner get at least 300 electoral votes? The answer is majority yes. There's a majority yes chance, 60% chance that the winner of this election gets at least 300 electoral votes.
That you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939. I write about this in my book. President Franklin Roosevelt was appalled that neo-Nazis, fascists in America were lining up to essentially pledge their support for the kind of government that they were seeing in Germany.
She was talking about linking him to this rally. He's going to have a rally at MSG. A lot of people sing, a lot of people perform at MSG. Do you link everyone who's ever performed at MSG to this neo-Nazi rally back in 1939? She's saying that's what this is, that Donald Trump is going to MSG. And she says to Caitlin, she says, and I write about it in my book. Yeah. She's trying to sell her book. So there are 2 messages that she's giving. Buy my book, and he's a fascist.
Sources close to the former president say this moment's all about making sure the base doesn't become complacent. That's why he's rallying evangelicals. He's reaching out to young conservatives, going on Joe Rogan's podcast later this week. And on Sunday, he'll be at Madison Square Garden in New York. It's all about casting his campaign as a movement of change, an echo of 2016.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. Rick Grenell is joining us, but a statement just came out. I wanted to read it before we went to Rick in case, because it just came out like 8 minutes ago, from the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate about the rhetoric being used and the fact that, again, we know that this rhetoric has encouraged bad actions, including 2 different assassination attempts on President Trump, one where he was shot, one where the gunman was taken just before he was in his sights. A golf course hole, which takes about 15 minutes a hole as a golfer. That's what he was away from, 15 minutes or less from being in the sights of someone else with an AR-15 who was inspired by political rhetoric to some extent. So we were supposed to bring it down. Instead, we're using words like Hitler, Nazi, and fascist coming from Hillary Clinton, coming from Harris. But we have had leadership now speaking out on this.
That's right. This is a strong bicameral statement from both the minority leader, Mitch McConnell, and Speaker Johnson, where they write to VP Harris, this summer, after the first attempted assassination of a presidential candidate in more than a century, President Biden insisted we cannot allow this violence to be normalized. In September, after President Trump escaped yet another close call, Vice President Harris acknowledged that we must, quote, all do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence. These words have proven hollow. In weeks since the second sobering reminder, the Democrat nominee for President of the United States has only fanned the flames beneath a boiling cauldron of political animus. Her most recent and most reckless invocations of the darkest evil of the 20th century seem to dare it to boil over. The vice president's words more closely remember those of President Trump's second would-be assassin than her own earlier appeal to civility. The statement goes on, but very strong words condemning her rhetoric that she's using in just these final 11 days of the election.
Yeah, I mean, so Rick, I want to go right to you. I mean, people are concerned, national leaders, again, Republican leaders at this point, but still, national leaders got their own relationships with President Trump, and they are more concerned, not as much about, it's not about the politics or the vote at this statement, but about the life of President Trump and the rhetoric being used. And of course, that affects the thousands of people that attend the rallies, the Secret Service and the police and everyone else, because you're putting them at risk as well.
Really shocking that more people are not coming forward to tell Kamala Harris to knock it off. It's dangerous rhetoric. I've called upon Comcast to rein in MSNBC, because when you listen to Morning Joe, which I have done the last 2 mornings, it is shocking that they are allowed to get away with what they're doing. They literally have no dissenting voices. They completely are unhinged and emotional and dangerous in their rhetoric. Every single guest is trying to outdo the next guest in outlandish statements. And, somehow our mainstream media is allowing people like Hillary Clinton and Comcast and others to push this rhetoric that is clearly inciting violence and going to get someone killed. When you call someone Adolf Hitler, you're asking for people to stop a killer of 6.5 million Jews. And I'm just so outraged that our institutions are not coming forward to condemn this. I'm on the Holocaust Museum board, and I am so outraged that they are silent during this time. They have been very jumpy when anyone on the Republican side even comes close to this rhetoric, and they are completely silent while the sitting vice president of the United States is running for the highest office in the land is talking like this. It's outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, again, in this term, and it starts with fascism, but now it's getting more specific. Rick, I'm trying to think, like, human beings in at least modern history and modern being, that we still have people alive who can tell those stories. And again, it's not as many, but they still are. From the jump from Hitler to the next worst thing is like Satan himself. I mean, it's like you can't really go anywhere else. I mean, even if you look at the Ayatollah in Iran, he might want to emulate. He might want to kind of be able to carry out some attack like that on Jews, but hasn't been able to do it and has been kind of regionally trapped by taking on that. And it's certainly a different kind of threat. And that's more just based on, that's a political rhetoric. That's based on actually what they say they would like to do. But so that jump there, and again, the idea is that if you said that, if you really believe that about someone, then preventing them from the White House, however it takes and whatever means necessary, would be some kind of patriotic move, especially if you're dealing with people who are slightly off kilter. Not too much, by the way.
Yeah, it is exactly how you describe it. You are encouraging people who are unstable and otherwise to take action to stop this. And if they don't think that they are encouraging violence, then they don't understand their words and the power of their words. Every single person should be outraged and condemning this. And we live in dangerous times. We already know that we've had multiple attempts on President Trump's life, and now Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris are literally telling the world that he is Hitler and people must take action.
I think, Rick, listen, both of us would defend and fight for the First Amendment and tough political rhetoric. There are so many things you could say, and of course you could get creative. I think you're one of those people that gets creative too in political rhetoric. That's still very tough, very hard-hitting, but doesn't have to demonize a person to the extent of violence. You could say, I don't think they'd be good for the country. I think this is why. I think this would hurt us. It would hurt the economy. It could even put our troops at risk because of bad policies or not understanding and letting other people kind of just run with departments because she can't answer questions about the economy, can't answer questions about foreign policy. That's rhetoric is one thing. But when you jump to that one word, and I think that's why the Holocaust Museum should be jumpy if anyone uses it, but it should be if anyone uses it, because it also undermines and demeans, and I think, it minimizes what was actually carried out by Hitler and the Nazis. And so when you compared a former American president to that, who did not start wars but ended them and supported the state of Israel in unbelievable ways that no other former president had done, that just isn't, you could still not like them, but that doesn't add up. And yet they're willing to throw all that out. And I think that, again, they might change to something else next week, But what I want to tell people is Rick, is the words of encouragement too. These early voting numbers, and again, no one should be sitting on their hands because we've got to see this kind of early number. We want to see these numbers double and triple the final week of early voting next week. And I know you're like swapping the vote, and this idea again that those numbers are looking good, and that's why we need to make sure if people have early voted, they got to get their friends out.
Yes. It is so important right now for people to understand that they have a role. They can't just sit by and watch this election play out for the next 11 days and then watch election returns and cross their fingers. That's not enough. We need people to literally, every single person listening to this, to call 10 people and tell them why you're voting for President Trump and why you think that it's important right now. What's happening to our country? And the best way for us to win elections is through personal contact. We spend millions and millions of dollars on commercials and literature and text messaging, but nothing works like a personal contact, like picking up the phone and asking someone to just chat. Did you vote? Let me tell you who I'm voting for. Let me tell you why. All of this personal contact is so credible because the people in your life actually listen to you more than the mail in the mailbox. And so every single person has to realize that they have a responsibility over the next 11 days to do something, not just sit back and cross their fingers.
So we got about 30 seconds, Rick. I know you've been traveling across the country, and a lot of times you're with President Trump. Just an update, too, about what you're seeing on the ground and what you're picking up.
Well, yesterday I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee. This morning I'm in Milwaukee, Madison, and then back to Milwaukee. Tonight I'll be in Grand Rapids, and tomorrow I'll be at the Michigan State game just in the parking lot, talking to people about the importance of Donald Trump. I see on the ground a great excitement, but people have got to take that excitement and actually turn it into voting. So get out and vote.
Yeah, I love those parking lots. It's part of what I did in a presidential campaign, running those events. We had mini football, you get footballs, I get people. And you can also really talk to a whole group of folks to make sure, as Rick said, it's that message that you can make a difference, that we really need you. We're the people that are just hardcore into this is not enough for us to win it without you getting out the vote. If people need a ride, if people need a place, do whatever you can. You've got more than just your ability to vote, but you can talk to people, you can help them get to the vote, you can help them watch their kids if they need to go vote, all of those things. Think about how you can add to the number. We'll be back on Sekulow.
We are down to the final sprint toward Election Day, just 2 weeks away. And as the two candidates pack their schedules to convince voters they are the right choice for president, the race is still neck and neck.
People are saying this feels a lot like 2016.
It does feel a lot like 2016. I was there on the ground in 2016. It was one of my first jobs ever. And I remember that moment, realizing that we had won the election, realizing everything that I had felt for the few weeks that led up to that point were actually true.
To those of you here or those watching at home who are independent-minded people like myself, who love our country and are committed to the Constitution and to freedom, the Democrat Party has no home for people like us. But we do have a home in the Republican Party where we are welcomed with open arms by President Trump and so many of you who love our country. And it is because of my love for our country, and specifically because of the leadership that President Trump has brought to transform the Republican Party and bring it back to the party of the people and the party of peace, that I'm proud to stand here with you today, President Trump, and announce that I'm joining the Republican Party. What do you think results will come down to for these candidates? Is it going to be policy or personality?
They meld together by the end of the campaign, and people look at a candidate for president and say, I like this about them, I dislike this about them, I like this policy about them, I dislike this policy about them, and they have their own calculus, and they produce the result that produces their vote. It's a fascinating process. The simple act of voting is actually not very simple.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. People have been on the phone. I want to answer the calls. People have good questions. And again, if you think that there's any legal issue that you've encountered while voting, and again, it can't just be you heard something, but and again, you can always email into aclj.org/help. And I don't want to discourage you from thinking it's not enough to do that. But if it's happened to you, or happened to your husband or wife, or a family member at least, contact us. Again, even if you're not sure if it's a legal issue or if it was something that needs to be handled that way, there's no harm. There's nothing wrong about asking. We're happy to assist and make sure that you can exercise your right to vote, that you can exercise your right to volunteer for candidates, hand out those voter guides. No, of course, there's rules states have about voting locations, how close you can get, yard signs. Some places have how big the yard signs can be in neighborhoods, that HO, all that kind of stuff. If you got questions about it, utilize us. aclj.org/help. We are going to be launching that in a bigger way next week, so stay tuned for that. Let's get right to the phones, Will.
Yeah, let's go to Daniel calling from Washington State on line 1. Daniel, you're on Sekulow.
Thank you for taking the call. It's hypocritical for the Democrats who are pushing a Russian democracy that limits free speech to call Trump Hitler when he's done so much for Israel and is pro-Israel. How could they get away with this sort of stuff?
They get away with it hoping that people, one, just hear the term, don't do the research. What we saw under the Trump administration, you're not going to see CNN or MSNBC putting out directly and in response to that, saying, well, he did, recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and was the only president that did that, even though they were all authorized to do it, Republican and Democrat. He did recognize Golan Heights as under the control and rightful control of Israel. He also put forward the Abraham Accords, which brought more peace and potential prosperity to the Gulf states and Israel directly, and more direct ties and tourism. So this idea, again, of supporting Israel, not just with military power, but with diplomatic power, and also going to the world and with more legitimization of the Jewish state of Israel and the capital, Jerusalem. But you know what? You don't see any of that. You just hear, oh, he talks tough, so he must be like Hitler? I mean, at this point, people can say what they want, Daniel. I mean, I think it's still have to a level of speech. Again, there's a line, because inciting violence is not covered by the First Amendment. Now, that line in court is very difficult. It should be very difficult. And we all know that as conservatives, that's the last thing you want to do, is running into saying, ban speech, ban this. That's not what I'm saying. But you can say it's dangerous. And you can point out that it's just a flat out lie. You can't even utilize the record is the opposite. But I think we're at a point now where we're living in such a twisted world. And I picked some of this up, that they use this kind of rhetoric about Jewish leaders.
Well, and honestly, Jordan, it's so riddled with irony that the Democrat Party, which is infected with a cancer of anti-Semitism and in support of Hamas, which shares ideological roots with Adolf Hitler, wanting to wipe out the Jewish people, I think that they should think twice about using that rhetoric, because it falls flat with his record. But they should be more concerned about rooting out people that actually support the ideas of Hitler within their own party with the way that they support Hamas. But let's go on to the phones.
It's also an act of desperation.
Right.
I mean, listen, things aren't looking good at this time for Harris. She's got to do – now, she still has time to turn it around. Democrats know they have the money and the resources. They just got to figure out some kind of message. And so far, they've realized that they haven't. And the strategists have been open about that. That's why David Axelrod, they're all saying what you're doing right now is not working. But there's still 11 days, and you got hundreds of millions of dollars. So try something else, and then try something else, and then try something else. I mean, they've got Barack Obama coming out attacking black men directly, saying that, that they're not supporting Kamala Harris stuff. So just because they happen to be the same race, they have to support her as president, or they're sexist. I mean, this is that idea that we were talking about with Mike Pompeo and Rick, when you just classify people as a group instead of talking to them as individuals. That's the true racism there. This idea that because the color of your skin and where you live, or if you're male or female, that house somehow directs how you feel, and that can be the only reason why you wouldn't support someone, is because you're somehow bad. There's something wrong. You're a sexist, you're a racist, or both. So somehow now Barack Obama is calling black men racist. I mean, this is the point we're at of a campaign. But these are because the numbers right now aren't as good. Now, if you're a Republican or a conservative or a Trump supporter listening to this, or someone who wants to not see Harris as president, you don't say now, well, the numbers aren't as good. I heard that from Jordan Sekulow. I hear it from people. So the news, Democrats will start putting that out heavily as well. They would love for you to think this weekend, chill out, 9 days out. We got this. We got the early vote. These numbers look wonderful. No. We have to swarm. Such big numbers that, again, I can't force Pennsylvania to call their election results, finalize their election results by 3 a.m. on November 5th. I can't. Or Michigan. And they're already putting out it's going to be the next day or two. But if you swarm the vote, it won't matter. It won't matter. It gets to a point where all of the goofiness, which undermines the entire electoral system, even if it can't be proven, and even if it's not true, but when you can't get votes counted on time and you undermine the trust in people. So remember, they will start pushing on all of us that you got this and we're good, so it's not worth spending your 3 hours. If it's raining or cold or too hot that day, wherever you are in the country, or you don't feel so great, it's not worth waiting in line if you waited to vote on election day. Or it's not worth bringing people to the poll or spending money to help watch someone's kids or grandkids, or, again, educating people, calling people, spending your time and resources. That's value. And so they'll make you think you don't need to. Your guys won. So that could be a very dangerous thing to it. So I'm always careful about being overly positive, but I think you could be a happy soldier, and you can go into battle with a smile, and that is what drives them nuts at the end of the day. Being mad and screaming and angry, that's what they want you to do. Taking their stuff with a grain of salt, saying you're ridiculous, you're absurd. I think there's righteous anger, and I think the point where people are getting shot at, that's true anger. And you can be angry about that. But the idea is, you can also know that we've got to keep this up. It's 11 more days. We can do it, but it is going to get tougher and tougher each day. And they'll try to make you feel like you've won. That will be the next move. By 5 days out, they're going to say, you know what, I think Republicans have got this. And then they've got hundreds of millions to go spend to try and find voters to show up on election day. Don't forget that. I'm sorry we didn't get to more of your calls, but I think we answered a lot of these.
Well, and Jordan, real quick, Michelle, who was a champion, says if conservatives all vote early, doesn't that give people who want to cheat a target to hit? I think if you can respond to that really quickly here.
It's the opposite. You overwhelm, you swarm the vote. You're not winning a whole state by 800 or 900 or 10,000 votes in a state with millions of voters. You need to go in and win by numbers, and there are that many people that are possible voters. They're out there. Either side can win. There are enough votes still out. Plenty. It's who's able to get them to the polls, whether it's early voting, same-day voting.